Hello, folks. I'm Josh McGee, and welcome to another episode of the Gateway to Soccer Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, very excited for this week's episode. I'll be talking to a guest who will be able to provide some great perspective on MLS and one of its biggest storylines as we kick off the 2021 season tonight. Checking out the home studio over here on this shoulder, got my old St. Louis FC warm-up, and I have flipped around my Chelsea Christian Pulisic jersey in honor of the 2 goals that he scored over the weekend versus Crystal Palace and the good match he had midweek in the Champions League. I'm also wearing my LA Galaxy t-shirt here that I got at my first ever MLS match that I attended in honor of the brand new season. So I'm excited for this show because there's a lot of great soccer to recap and to cover as we head into this weekend. And honestly, there were a lot of different things that I could put here in this opening block to talk about. But unfortunately, it's been a rough couple of weeks, especially in the real world, but also in soccer. And I felt it was necessary to open this week's show talking about some pretty serious issues and getting a few things off my chest. As I've said before on this show, I, like many, try to use sports as a mechanism sometimes to escape from the real world. And sometimes it's possible to use it in that way. But most of the times it's impossible because sports are a reflection of the real world, the good and the bad. And unfortunately, recently, it seems to be more of a reflection of what's bad going on in the world currently. It's been a difficult week following the murder trial of George Floyd, in addition to the recent murder of yet another Black man, Daunte Wright. I'm not going to dive deep into these issues here. Again, I'm not trying to get into debates or arguments with people, but I would encourage everybody to listen. Listen to those right now who are hurt, who are grieving during this process, understand why they are so hurt, why they are grieving, and come at it from a stance of compassion and empathy instead of, reaching for anger or thinking that you're an expert on this type of situation. I would encourage everybody to listen. What I will say here, what I will take a stand on, is that our country either has a hard time understanding or doesn't want to understand that racism isn't cut and dry, that the worst of it is deeply rooted systemically across our nation. This goes, of course, for all minority groups, but especially African Americans. It's not always just a bunch of people saying the N-word. It's that Black people are routinely set up to fail and treated differently in this country than white people. It's apparent in the news right now, and it was very apparent, unfortunately, on night 1 of the NWSL Challenge Cup. The reigning champions, the Houston Dash and the Chicago Red Stars, played to a competitive 0-0 draw last Friday night to open up the tournament. While there weren't any goals scored, it was still 2 top clubs in the NWSL. First match of the season, still a lot to be interested by. In a Twitter thread posted the following morning, Red Stars player Sarah Gordon made accusations that she and her boyfriend had been racially profiled by a Dash security guard after the match. Now, there are COVID-19 protocols in place that I believe prohibit players from interacting with family and other people in the stands. However, at this time, several Dash players had already been interacting with their families. So at least from a player's perspective, if you see all of that, you're not going to think of anything different. You're going to go and interact with your family. So she was going to go meet up with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend came down through the stands. However, before he got too close, security got in the way and told Gordon that her boyfriend would be arrested if he got any closer. Gordon, who is Black, was the only player from both clubs who was confronted in this manner, while, as I already said, several Dash players were already interacting with their families. Red Stars assistant coach Scott Parkinson backed up Gordon's story, stating that he was able to watch the interaction from afar. Now, the Dash did put out a statement on Saturday, but the initial one only referred to Gordon as a player from Chicago and didn't really tackle the main issues at hand. There was a lot of backlash over the weekend, and a couple days later, the Dash put out a second statement referring to Gordon in person, stating that an incident had occurred and that they were cooperating with the league with their investigation. So 2 things here. First off, the much lesser component of this, which is the competitive component. Stopping the one Chicago player while all the other Houston players are already breaking protocols is just so tacky. The match is over. Extend the same common courtesy to your opponent as you would to your home club. It just doesn't make sense. Either enforce the rules for both clubs or don't enforce them at all and don't worry about it. But of course here, the main component is unfortunately the racial component. While I'm not trying to compare what's going on in the real world with this specific incident, no one was fatally hurt in this case. What I do want to point out is that this type of common disrespect happens to African Americans every day in all walks of society. This was just a high profile case. This was just, caught in a public space. Think about all that is going on in this country that goes unchecked, that is not brought up, and how much stuff is gotten away with in our country today. Thankfully, Sarah Gordon said something. If she didn't, this incident probably would have just gone away and we never would have heard anything about it. But she stepped up, she said something, And of course, the public and hopefully the NWSL will hold the Dash accountable. That first statement was poor. Thankfully, people spoke up, held them accountable, and they came out with a brand new statement, and hopefully the NWSL will further hold them accountable. But that's the only way this stuff's going to get better, is if people speak up and if people are held accountable. Unfortunately, we have a lot farther to go in this country overall than in just sports on this issue, but I hope sports continues to pave the way to continue to confront this issue, to crack down on these types of incidents. This was an embarrassing look for the NWSL on the first weekend of the 2021 season, but unfortunately, it's just a sign of the times right now in this country. Hopefully, in sports and overall, we continue to find a way to move forward, to learn, and to crack down on this types of behavior. Otherwise, it's just going to become even more commonplace in this country. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents on the incident from this past weekend. Obviously, right now, the NWSL are currently investigating it. We'll see what comes from that. And again, hopefully this is just a learning experience, and hopefully it does not happen again, not just in the NWSL, but in all sports. Now let's transition over to some stuff that's happening on the pitch. I'm going to start off with the Champions League as they wrapped up the quarterfinal stage this past week. We have our final four, the teams that were able to advance to the semifinals. Let's start off with the big matchup, and that, of course, would be Bayern Munich versus PSG. Despite winning the second leg 1-0, the reigning champs Bayern Munich were eliminated by PSG, who advanced on an aggregate score of 3-3 based on away goals. Bayern started off the match well, as you expect, because they were the team that needed to score, but PSG actually created the best chances early on, with Neymar hitting the woodwork multiple times. However, it was Bayern who got on the scoreboard first in the 40th minute, thanks to Eric Choupo-Moting, who was the first to head in a loose ball in the box. Going into the second half, PSG created some chances, but for the most part, they were pegged back by Bayern, who only needed one more goal to advance from the tie. However, the continued absence of striker Robert Lewandowski was definitely felt in the second half, as Bayern weren't really able to get things going, and they were unable to score again. Now, like I said, in that first leg, the problem was with Bayern's defense, not so much Lewandowski being absent, but he was definitely felt here, especially in that second half. Bayern were pushing for that last goal. They just couldn't get anything going. They didn't have the right personnel. Lewandowski would have been great to target in the box with different crosses, but he wasn't there. Bayern weren't unable to break down PSG, who've been very impressive defensively over these past few ties. And yeah, they did enough to get things done. They obviously sunk back a little bit into some of the problems that they've been having in their last couple of major Champions League tie, but they exercised the demons here. Rematch of last year's final, which they lost. They beat Bayern this time, at least over 2 legs, and were able to advance to the semifinals. Very impressive performance. They've got to be considered one of the favorites if you look at what they've been doing over the past couple of ties. You got Neymar, you got Mbappe on fine form. They should be getting more people back, especially on the defensive end. They should be also getting Verratti back, hopefully soon, in the midfield, which will make them even more dangerous. So Mauricio Pochettino's got his club going right now. And yeah, very impressive performance, knocking out the reigning champions. The other tie that wrapped up on Tuesday was FC Porto versus Chelsea. While the match lacked excitement until the very final moments, Chelsea won't care as they advance to the semifinals on an aggregate score of 2-1 after losing the second leg 1-0. Neither side were able to register a shot on target in the first half, with Chelsea content to sit back and focus on defense. Porto upped the pressure in the second half, but they were unable to break through until the 93rd minute when Mehdi Taremi scored off of a beautiful bicycle kick. Honestly, could be the goal of the tournament. It was that good. It was that much of a screamer, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough as Porto needed another goal, and they scored too late and weren't able to get back on the score sheet. So again, this was a very professional result for Chelsea. You knew what they were trying to do. They were happy to soak up pressure and try to hit Porto on the counter. They were unable to do so, but the defense was able to hold firm long enough to get the result that they needed. So again, very impressive performance for Thomas Tuchel and his guys to be able to advance to the semifinals, knocking off Porto, who again may have been the side that everybody wanted to play. Remember, they were coming off that huge upset over Juventus, and Chelsea were able to hold firm and hold them off the score sheet across 2 legs until the very last minute. So again, very impressive performance by Chelsea as they move on to the semifinal. Moving on to Wednesday's matches, let's first talk Manchester City versus Borussia Dortmund. Facing elimination in the second half, Manchester City came back from 1 goal down to beat Dortmund 2-1 and to advance to the semifinals on an aggregate score of 4-2. The home side struck first in the 15th minute when 17-year-old Jude Bellingham smashed home a shot from inside the box to break Christian Pulisic's record as the youngest goal scorer in the Champions League for Borussia Dortmund. In the second half, City were once again the benefactors of a tight decision when they were awarded a penalty after VAR confirmed that Dortmund's Emre Can committed a handball in the box, which Riyad Mahrez stepped up to convert. Later on, just like he did in the first leg, City's Phil Foden stepped up to deliver the decisive blow, hitting a blistering shot in the 75th minute that would prove to be the match winner. So I definitely think that the main point from this is that Dortmund just had some incredibly tough luck. Go back to the first leg when they should have had that goal through Bellingham when he took the ball off Ederson, but it was called back because of a foul. Now in this match, the handball. Look, I get it. Can's arm is basically out to here. It's definitely not a very good look, but he makes contact with the ball with his head first. He doesn't have a lot of control. It goes on to the top part of his arm, which I thought wasn't an area where you would call a handball. Unfortunately, I think what did him in was his arm being at that unnatural angle, and that's what VAR saw. And of course, the referee called a penalty initially, and there was probably not enough to overturn the call. So again, tough luck to Dortmund, who I thought were incredibly impressive over 2 legs in defense, managing to hold City to just 2 goals in each match. I thought it'd be a lot worse, but they were able to at least keep themselves in this tie for a very long time. Unfortunately, obviously, they probably would have liked to at least gotten 1 goal from Erling Haaland. I don't think he had a bad tie. Obviously, he provided the assist in the first match, but here, though, City did a much better job of containing him, and that, of course, is the main source of goals for Dortmund. So again, I think City, despite some of those decisions, I think they just had a little bit more quality here, especially on defense, and that is what led them to advancing here in the semifinals. Definitely think Dortmund could have maybe advanced here if those decisions go their way, but in the end, I think just a little bit of extra quality is what helped City go through. And lastly, Liverpool versus Real Madrid. Liverpool had plenty of chances to come back in this tie, but they were stopped by Thibaut Courtois and Real Madrid, who advanced to the semifinals on a 3-1 aggregate score after the second leg finished 0-0. Liverpool got off to a great start here as well. Lots of early chances, but they were unable to put them away. There was that beautiful chance where I believe Mane played in Salah into the box, but he was stopped by a charging Courtois. Karim Benzema had the best chance for the visitors in the first half when he hit the post. In the second half, Liverpool, of course, up in the pressure, trying to get back in the tie, but whatever chances they were able to create, they were snuffed out by Courtois, who I thought had a man-of-the-match type of performance, stopped every high-profile chance that Salah, Mane, and others had for Liverpool. Madrid were pretty much content to play defense here in this tie. They're, of course, playing short-handed, especially at the back. Still no Sergio Ramos or Rafael Varane, and they were able to get things done here, keep out that Liverpool front three, and yeah, pretty much sit on their laurels from that first tie. So again, Real Madrid, they've been inconsistent this season, but over these past few Champions League matchups, they've been beginning to find their form. And of course, once they get back to full strength, they're going to be a tough out here going forward. So again, here Liverpool just didn't have enough quality, especially in front of net, to get things done and get back in this tie. And yeah, not surprised, honestly, really, based off of their pedigree, Real Madrid moving on to the semifinals. So that's my recap of the quarterfinals of the Champions League. The first leg of the semifinals will get underway not this next week, but the following week. And of course, we know those matchups. PSG versus Manchester City, El Clasico, honestly could be this year's final. Probably the 2 top clubs in Europe will be going at it here early on in this stage. I think it's going to come down to City's defense. We've seen them just do fantastic work in the Premier League and in the Champions League, but this will be their toughest task. Kylian Mbappe, Neymar, probably right now the most on-form duo in all of Europe. We're going to see if City are up to the task in stopping those two. I think that'll definitely be the key matchup. On the other side, Chelsea versus Real Madrid haven't met since the 1998 Super Cup, so this will be my first opportunity to see these 2 clubs clash. Obviously, it would have been cool if Eden Hazard was healthy for this matchup. Obviously, he's on Real Madrid now. You got Thibaut Courtois over there as well, facing his former club. I think this will also come down to defense. Is Chelsea's new-look defense under Thomas Tuchel up to the task of keeping out Real Madrid? I think for Madrid, the important thing is that they get healthy. They get their first duo center backs in Varane and Ramos back, as well as some of those other offensive players, which could be used to help break down Chelsea's defense. But again, I think those are the important matchups. In terms of favorites, like I said, I think PSG, you got to consider them the overall favorite in this tournament after they just knocked out the reigning champs. Obviously, though, if City were to win, they would be installed as the favorite. Chelsea versus Real Madrid, I think I favor Madrid right now. I just think they have a little bit more scoring punch on that side. Chelsea are still working through things on that end of the ball. But I definitely think that any of those 4 sides can win these ties. And of course, when you get to the final, anything is possible. So again, a couple weeks time, we'll have the semifinal matchups in the first leg of the Champions League. Okay, so like I said, to open the show, MLS kicks off their 2021 season this weekend. And before tonight's opening matches, much like I did last week with the NWSL, I want to provide my preview for the upcoming season for you all here. So again, first going to start off with 5 storylines to watch out for this upcoming MLS season. Coming in at number 5, how will the newcomers fare this season? Whether it be Alexandre Pato at Orlando City SC, record signing Brenner at FC Cincinnati, or Ryan Shawcross at Inter Miami CF, how will some of the newer high-profile signings fare in their first season? It's very important that you get your designated players and other big-name acquisitions right. Look at Lucas Zelarayan at Columbus Crew SC, basically helped lead them to the MLS Cup last season. It's important to get those signings right. I'm interested to see, with all these different types of players, with the pedigree and experience that they bring in, how do they fit into MLS? Pato is going to be really responsible for the goals there down in Orlando, because it looks like Daryl DK will not be coming back. So I'm interested to see how he translates to MLS, how he helps out Orlando. Of course, Brenner, record signing striker for MLS. He's going to be there at Cincinnati. Can he help bring them up from the basement? A lot of interesting new signings, of course, across the league. And it'll be, again, really interesting. One of the bigger storylines will be, how do they fare in their first season? Next up at number 4, is Phil Neville the right guy for Miami? Despite the fact that they made the playoffs in their first ever season in MLS, Inter Miami CF parted ways with manager Diego Alonso in the offseason. Now working under former teammate and club owner David Beckham, can Neville be the guy to help elevate Miami to the top of the Eastern Conference? I know Neville, of course, with his playing career and, of course, his work with the English women's national team, brings in a lot of experience and pedigree, but he has no experience in MLS. And as we've seen over the past few years, you kind of need to have some people at the helm who have MLS experience. Miami, of course, have got all the fanfare still. They'll be entering their second season, and they already have that base of making the playoffs in the first season. So they can't go down and miss the playoffs. That would be a huge disaster with all the fanfare and public, storylines that they've been producing down there in Miami. So again, we're going to have to see if Neville's experience and pedigree translates to MLS. Can he get the best out of Gonzalo Higuain, out of Blaise Matuidi, and some of the other guys that they've brought in to Miami this season? Definitely, again, I think that they're going to be a big storyline here in MLS, and we're going to have to see if they can improve upon their inaugural season. Moving on to storyline number 3, can Austin FC continue the trend of early expansion success? Austin FC open up their inaugural season in MLS this weekend with a very tough fixture versus LAFC. Can they continue upon that early success from the expansion clubs that have come before them? We saw Nashville and Miami make the playoffs last year in their first season. We've seen clubs like Atlanta and LAFC have early success in their tenures with MLS. Can Austin follow that trend? They've obviously got the big names in the ownership group. They've got Claudio Reyna, U.S. men's national team legend, constructing this squad. Can they get it done in their first season? Can they make the playoffs in a very tough Western Conference? They got a lot of competition within their own state, much less that conference. But in terms of the guys they've brought in and how they've constructed the team with Josh Wolf at the helm as manager, can they get it done in their first season? Definitely going to be paying attention to them. Only expansion franchise this season to watch. We'll have to see how they do in their first year. Next up at number 2, can Columbus repeat as MLS champions? The reigning champs, Columbus Crew SC, return all 11 starters from that MLS Cup final victory, as well as the additions of Kevin Molino and Bradley Wright Phillips. Can they be the first club since the Galaxy in 2012 to repeat as MLS champions? They got the talent to do it. Again, like I said, bringing back all of those starters. They've still got Zelarayan. They still got Santos. They still got Zardes. They still got Nagby. They still got Caleb Porter at the helm there as manager. And, of course, they're going to be opening up that brand new stadium sometime this season. All of the pieces are there. We've seen their early success here in the CONCACAF Champions League. Can they just make it through a full MLS season this time around and carry that burden of being the reigning champs? I definitely think they will be one of the contenders and be one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, but it's all about navigating that long road all the way back through the playoffs. So again, all the talent is back. The addition of Molino, I think, is really important in terms of giving them even more offensive firepower. I'm going to be very excited to see how Columbus does this season and if they can repeat as champions. But my number 1 storyline for this season in MLS is LAFC. Is this finally their year? They were installed as the odds-on favorite to win this season's MLS Cup title. Can almost kind of give them a pass for last season due to the stop-start nature of it. But now that we're going to have a full season and that they bring back their two MVP and Golden Boot contenders in Carlos Vela and Diego Rossi. Can they finally get things done? Kind of have to be a little bit nervous for Bob Bradley if they're not able to do it. They've been near the top of MLS here over the past couple of seasons, but then they've been unable to get things done in the playoffs. If that happens again, I definitely think that Bradley is going to go just because of the high-level nature of that club and the fact that they haven't been able to get things done late on into the season. They got the talent to do it, as they always do, but we're just going to have to see if it's going to be enough this time around. Western Conference is incredibly tough still. We've had a couple teams since past season that have really improved and are going to be up there with the likes of LAFC and Seattle Sounders and some of the other clubs in the Western Conference. Can they get it done, get through all those clubs, get to their first MLS Cup final, and then can they win their first MLS Cup? It's going to be really tough. There are going to be a lot of good teams, but I definitely think they're near the top there in terms of contenders, and they've got to get things done here. Otherwise, I think there'll be some sweeping changes to that club in the offseason. So those were just a handful of the many storylines to watch out for in the upcoming MLS season. Now I want to get to my list of 5 players to watch out for in MLS this season. Of course, there are a bunch of different players to watch out for, but these are just the guys that came to my mind first. So let's start off at number 5. And of course, I had to include a St. Louisan on this list, and I chose New York Red Bulls forward Tom Barlow. Barlow is coming off a season where he scored 3 goals in 12 regular season starts for the Red Bulls. He also started in their lone playoff match. Again, hopefully he continues to get more opportunities. I know they signed a couple guys in the offseason up top, but I definitely think if they continue to start him and give him more playing time, he can be a reliable source of goals for the Red Bulls. I definitely think they'll be a playoff contender, so the fact that Barlow will be playing on a good team is really good for his career and for his development. Again, St. Louis native. It'll be really cool to see how he develops this season. I know there's a bunch of other different guys in the league, but I definitely think he can be one of the higher contributors on the Red Bulls. Next up at number 4, New England Revolution goalkeeper Matt Turner. Turner was good in the regular season for New England, but he was even better in the playoffs, only conceding 3 goals in 4 matches while making 16 saves. I believe he had 70-plus saves in the regular season. New England seemed to figure things out in the playoffs, knocking off the Supporters' Shield winners, Philadelphia Union, along the way. I definitely think they'll be near the top of the Eastern Conference this season, and Turner's going to have to play as good for them to be there. A lot has to happen in front, but I think that his consistent goalkeeping, I definitely think he'll be in the mix for goalkeeper of the year. If he's able to build upon that playoff success that he had, New England can definitely be an MLS Cup contender. So a lot of goalkeepers to watch out for, but I definitely think that Turner is at the head of that class. Coming in at number 3, Austin FC forward Cecilio Dominguez. Dominguez is the club's first ever designated player, having last played on loan for Club Guarani in Paraguay, where he scored a total of 6 goals and added 4 assists across all competitions. So while Austin FC, all eyes are going to be on them, of course, there's a lot of pressure across the entire team overall. But Dominguez being their first ever designated player, he's got to be the guy to lead them in terms of production. I believe he can play in the midfield as well, but I believe initially he's going to get the number 10 shirt and play up top for Austin. You're going to be excited to see what he can bring. We've seen the success of other South American players who initially come into MLS. But for Austin FC to have a good inaugural season, I definitely think Dominguez is going to have to come up huge. So excited to see what he can bring to the table alongside Austin this season. Next up at number 2, Minnesota United FC midfielder Emmanuel Bebelo Reynoso. Reynoso helped Minnesota to the Western Conference Final last season, smashing league records with his 7 playoff assists. In the prime of his career at 25 years old, can he help Minnesota take the next step in MLS? Reynoso, he's just an incredible playmaker. His service into the box, his through balls, an incredible passer. He's able to set up his teammates. He just makes everyone around him better. And I definitely think coming off of the success he had in the playoffs, he's primed for a big season. He's going to help Minnesota stay near the top of the Western Conference there. Who knows? Maybe they can take the next step and make it to the MLS Cup final this season. But I think in order for them to do that, Reynoso's going to have to keep up that pace that he had last season. But again, he's one of those types of guys that makes everyone around him better, and it's just a joy to watch. So I'm excited to see what he has as a follow-up to what he was able to do in the playoffs last year. But my number 1 player to watch out for in MLS this season is the return of Atlanta United FC forward Josef Martinez. Martinez suffered a torn ACL in the very first match of last season. That was even before the pandemic really got going, and he missed the entirety of 2020. Now that he's back, if he's able to rediscover his form, does that make Atlanta United title challengers? Martinez, again, one of the best goal scorers in MLS history. Just his pace, his technical ability, his finishing ability make him the complete striker. You now add him back into the mix with Atlanta and what they've got going on over there. We've already seen some of their early success in CONCACAF Champions League. Can the addition of Martinez back into the fold help restore them back to the top of the Eastern Conference? Again, just very excited to see Martinez back onto the pitch. I hope he's at least healthy. I hope he's close to what he used to be. And if that's the case, then I think you definitely have to take Atlanta more seriously. So again, the return of Joseph Martinez is going to be exciting, and he's my number one player to watch out for in MLS. So this is my quick preview for the upcoming MLS season. Very excited to get things underway this weekend. Some great matches tonight. You got the Houston Dynamo versus the San Jose Earthquakes, and that rematch of last year's Western Conference Final between the Seattle Sounders and Minnesota United FC ahead of some great weekend fixtures. So again, very excited for MLS to return. Before moving on to another subject, I want to talk about a few other stories from MLS from this past week, starting off with a huge shout out to the 5 clubs who will be advancing to the next round of the CONCACAF Champions League. You had Atlanta United, you had Portland Timbers, Philadelphia Union, Toronto FC, and Columbus Crew SC making it to the next round. Some big wins by those MLS clubs. Again, still hoping that one of them can break through and win the crown here this year instead of in previous years past, struggling against especially those clubs from Liga MX. But still, some very decisive victories, I think. You had Portland with that huge 5-0 victory in the second leg. Again, very excited to see that early success from MLS clubs so far in this competition. Elsewhere, speaking with the media ahead of the opening of the 2021 season, MLS Commissioner Don Garber announced that the league has moved forward in vetting alternative markets for the league's 30th franchise. Places like Las Vegas, Phoenix, and San Diego were mentioned as potential sites for the newest club in MLS, though Garber did not rule out the opportunity for Sacramento to reclaim their spot if a new investor group emerges. So again, it's good to see that Sacramento are still in the mix, but I definitely think the league is ready to move on and look at other opportunities. Definitely still think that Vegas is the favorite, but we've seen the success that Phoenix and San Diego have had at the USL Championship level. And of course, those are just great sports markets overall. But again, like I said, I definitely think that Vegas is the favorite. But still, league already looking at different opportunities, and we'll have to see who will be the lucky 30th team there to join MLS. And lastly, real quickly, wanted to highlight DC United announcing the hiring of Lucy Rushton as the club's general manager. Rushton becomes the second current female to hold a general manager position of a major men's professional team, as well as the second woman in MLS history to hold a GM position. Rushton was recently the head of technical recruitment and analysis at Atlanta United FC and has previous working experience over in England for Reading and Watford. So congrats to Rushton for making history and for getting the job that she thoroughly deserves. Hopefully going to see more opportunities for women in men's professional sports to get those high-profile jobs. So again, very excited to see what she can do over there in DC. Now let's move on to talk some women's soccer. And I'm going to start off with the U.S. women's national team. They were held to a 1-1 draw versus Sweden before moving on to beat France 2-0 in a pair of friendlies last week. Megan Rapinoe scored a penalty in each match for her team-leading 6th and 7th goal of the year. Alex Morgan was the other goal scorer in the France match. She scored her 109th career goal. Also of note, Carly Lloyd made her 300th appearance for the women's national team in the Sweden match, becoming only the 3rd player to do so in national team history. So again, a lot of positives from these results for the U.S. women's national team. The important thing was they played top competition. Sweden and France are 2 of the other best clubs in the world. This is a good tune-up for before the Olympics. And of course, I'm sure a lot of those players have what's going on with the NWSL on their minds. But this is, again, just a good opportunity for them to face some top competition for later on down the road when they face some of those teams in the Olympics. So again, I thought this was more of a positive showing. It's okay. They're still unbeaten. They still haven't been topped. And again, it was just kind of good to see that full run out of the U.S. women's national team, their full lineup, and see how they do against some of the top competition in the world. All right, let's move on and recap the first weekend of the NWSL Challenge Cup. Starting off with that other match on night 1 between Portland Thorns FC and Kansas City. Portland beat Kansas City 2-1 at Providence Park. I thought Portland did an excellent job of providing service into the box and finishing off their chances. But this match ended in fireworks. 3 players ended up being set off, including Portland's Morgan Weaver and Kansas City's Kristen Edmonds after a physical confrontation in the corner near the end of the match. I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I hate time wasting in the corner. It leads to situations just like these. Players can get hurt. Players can get into confrontations like we saw in this match. I know there's no real rule that can outlaw it, but man, I just hate it because of the risk that it had. There was kind of a takedown in the corner. Both players got in each other's faces. They kind of like open palmed, like stiff armed each other. in people's faces. It was just a real ugly scene. Again, not something that I think the NWSL would have wanted in their opening weekend. I guess, any publicity is good publicity for some people, but this was kind of an ugly scene and kind of an ugly way of handling things, but still impressive win by Portland in their opening match. On day 2, and what I thought was the match of the weekend between North Carolina Courage and the Washington Spirit, rookie Trinity Rodman came off the bench and scored in her professional debut, but it was not enough as North Carolina Courage were able to win the match 3-2. Very impressive performance by the Courage. They were able to get up on the scoreboard early. It was really cool to see Rodman come on and take that long ball that was sent to her, go in on goal, and score her first professional goal, but it wasn't enough. I did think the Spirit did well to battle back, but still, very impressive opening statement by North Carolina. Elsewhere on the day, Racing Louisville FC were able to rescue a point in their first ever league match, with Brooke Hendricks scoring in the 93rd minute to earn a 2-2 draw versus the Orlando Pride. Again, I thought this was a good way for Racing Louisville to enter into the NWSL. Great fight. Good to see their rookie class get some debuts there and make some starts. And, of course, able to score a couple goals in this match. Of course, they took the lead very early on in this match, but they were able to figure things out in the end and rescue that point. The Pride also played their second match in the Challenge Cup midweek versus the newly rebranded New Jersey, New York Gotham FC club, and Gotham were able to win this match 1-0. So as I'm talking, I'm going to scroll at the bottom the results from Thursday night that didn't make it into the taping. So far, it's been very good starts by the likes of Portland and North Carolina, who are going to be tested in this weekend's slate of fixtures. As far as tonight, we've got the OL Reign playing their first Challenge Cup match versus the Houston Dash. As we look ahead to next week, very important matchup between Gotham FC and the North Carolina Courage, who both won their opening match at the Challenge Cup. And we're going to get our first version of the Cascadia Derby between OL Reign and Portland Thorns next week. So again, very exciting start to the NWSL Challenge Cup. Yes, of course, there were a couple of different unfortunate situations, but as far as the action on the pitch, it was very entertaining. Some good starts by a lot of the top teams. Again, looking forward to what the next week has in store for us. Okay, there wasn't much happening this week in terms of St. Louis soccer news, but I want to pick out a couple of stories here to fill out this segment this week. I want to provide a little bit of an update. I haven't done so yet on St. Louis FC Academy and how they are doing. They are currently competing across all levels in MLS Next. I want to provide a little bit of update on how things have started. Varying results across the different age groups, but I do want to say that the under 16s have gotten off to the best start. They are perfect 2-0-0 so far. I do know that this weekend, in terms of the top levels, the under 17s and the under 19s have a great opportunity. They will be taking on Columbus Crew SC's teams. So again, very exciting to see them go up against some of the top competition at this level. Of course, Columbus Crew, the reigning champs, so who knows if some of these players can move on to that top level. So again, excellent opportunity for the St. Louis FC Academy. We're going to have to see how they continue to do with their season. We haven't had an Atletico TV episode over the past couple weeks, but I definitely know that when we get back, we can get a more comprehensive update from Luis Swisher on how the academy is doing. The other update is on SLU Soccer, as both teams were in action at the A10 tournament on Thursday. Let's start off with the positive and talk about the SLU women's soccer team. Head coach Katie Shields earned her 100th career win as SLU were able to beat Dayton 3-0 behind goals from Abby Miller, Hannah Friedrich, and Hannah Larson. The win advanced SLU to the A10 tournament final, where they will face off against Davidson tomorrow at noon at Herman Stadium. SLU earned the right to host the A10 tournament as they were named the #1 overall seed after going a perfect 8-0 in conference play. So again, congrats to the SLU women's soccer team. They've had a fantastic season. They basically breezed through almost conference play. And yeah, really great win. Got on the board pretty early against Dayton. Were able to hold on to that lead. Hopefully they'll be able to finish the job off tomorrow, beat Davidson, and take their place in the NCAA tournament. On the other side, the SLU men's soccer team earned the #2 overall seed in the A10 tournament, which took place in Dayton, Ohio, but they were upset in the semifinal round by Fordham, who won by a score of 2-1. Both those goals came in a 3-minute stretch early on in the second half. SLU did their best to fight back and try to score late on in the match to send it to overtime, but they were unable to do so, and they finished their season at 9-5. So a really tough break for the SLU men's soccer team. They had a really good season, some pretty impressive wins, but now I'm assuming they're going to be waiting to see if they can get in with an at-large bid to the NCAA tournament. But still, pretty good season by the men's soccer team. But obviously, congrats to the women's team on making it to the final of the A10 tournament. And hopefully, again, like I said, they'll be able to wrap things up tomorrow versus Davidson. But still, overall, again, just happy that we were able to have a season that these players got a chance to play. And yeah, hoping for more good things down the road from both teams. So for my guest this week, I was able to bring in someone who knows a lot about the history of MLS and who is currently covering one of its biggest storylines headed into this season. Hope you enjoy. Well, I'm honored to be joined by today the author of this book, The United States of Soccer, MLS, and the Rise of American Soccer Fandom, as well as an author for MLSsoccer.com and the Striker Texas. Phil West, thank you so much for joining me on the show this week.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, again, I understand this is probably a huge week for you, of course, as you've been writing about your hometown club, Austin FC, as they get ready for their inaugural week in MLS. But I wanted to first talk to you about this book because it's fantastic. It's a great historical tale about the first, 20 years or so of MLS. And of course, I understand a little bit of the motivation behind it. You're a huge soccer fan yourself, but I want to talk a little bit about how you went about writing this book, the motivation behind choosing this particular type of style for writing about the history of MLS, and also the motivation of how it was organized and some of the people that you reached out to for it.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about it is it actually started out as a completely different book. I was going around to a different city every day to watch World Cup games in 2014 and just wanted to write about the fan experience, and kind of had a back and forth with my agent and over the press that was interested in what I was doing writing wise. And they said, well, how about a history of MLS? And I said, okay. Again, it was a league that at that time I was starting to get into more. And there were definitely some interesting kind of through lines and back and forth between fans of clubs and fans of the national team. And of course, I'd gotten really interested during that World Cup cycle run in particular about American Outlaws and kind of their role and everything. And there's a subsequent book that I did called I Believe That We Will Win, which talks about the U.S. And finally, that came out in 2018, right as the U.S. did not qualify for that World Cup. So things were a little strange there with the book. But yeah, basically, I wanted to talk to a lot of the people who were foundational in the creation of the league. There's some early GMs that I talked to. Peter Wilt in particular, who started the Chicago Fire, had a lot of really interesting, fun things to say. It was a really fun interview. I talked to the guy who's the president over at the Miami Fusion, or the owner at the Miami Fusion rather. And that was pretty interesting because, again, this was somebody who, Ken Behrens, who had been trying to get a team to work in South Florida and just ran into a lot of different difficulties, some things that were just weather related, just really, really strange things, and just not being able to actually get a stadium in Miami. And that team ended up being contracted after just 4 years, but definitely, still kind of left its mark in the league, right? There were a lot of players that came out of that went on to greatness elsewhere. And of course, the legendary Ray Hudson was, over there for a time as a play-by-play person, and then eventually became a manager for a while, and now is, just kind of the legend that he is. So I wanted to talk to a lot of those foundational people. I had a good sit down with Garber, with Mark Abbott, who is kind of the second in command at MLS. And we talked about just a lot of different issues, some of the that are now still, I think, kind of relevant, but also obviously the league has just kind of changed and grown over the last few years. One of the things that really strikes me kind of looking back at the book now is just how much more there could be to write. So just so many amazing things have happened over the last 5 years. And, definitely I think the newer expansion cities are raising the bar. And, obviously we're seeing some stuff in Austin happening that is intriguing. And I think with St. Louis, that's going to happen as well.
Well, I also want to talk about a bigger part also of your book, like you kind of mentioned, was the fan perspective, the rise of supporters groups originally, what they had to do through early construction, kind of the battles they had with themselves, with the clubs. But now, as we've gotten to this point in MLS, there's still some of those things that happened originally that are still happening today, things that they're trying to overcome. But in terms of the development of the supporters group in MLS, I guess what I want to ask is what has changed the most in terms of their role with the club and what they've been able to do?
I think a lot of it has just been this kind of effort to build fan culture, and the league just acknowledging that kind of more and more. Obviously you look at the kind of new stadium designs, and, for example, in Austin, it's a safe standing zone. You're seeing that happen more and more in stadiums. And that's definitely to accommodate supporters groups. And that's definitely to raise the bar on the kind of energy that those fans bring to the stadium. It's not just these are people who are there as ambassadors for the club, which they certainly are, but also just the energy in the stadium, just the experience for the people who are not standing behind one goal. It's definitely palpable, and it's definitely something that I think really lends to the appeal of the league. Like, for example, when Atlanta started in their debut season, even before MBS was opened, they were playing in Bobby Dodd, which was this college stadium on the Georgia Tech campus. And I went to their second home game, and just, yeah, because I've been talking to some of the capos over at Austin FC about that now. Just the first kind of inklings of seeing, okay, the rest of the audience here understands what the supporters are doing. They're leading a chant, and the rest of the stadium is following along. Just this really kind of cool electric magic moment. And I think we're seeing, kind of more and more awareness of that in the league, that it's not just here's a bunch of crazies at one end of the stadium that are doing their thing for 90 minutes, but it becomes kind of more of the holistic experience.
So like you said, obviously, some time has passed since you, the last part of the book that you talk about in MLS. And like you said, there could be a lot of different things that you could write about. But I would imagine one of the biggest things that you would write about was the pandemic and MLS's response to it last year for the most part, and still kind of trickling into this year, but mainly last year, how they were able to kind of come up with somewhat of a season and were able to complete what they had started, just only having the 1 week. In terms of their attempts to combat that, and also the financial side of it, because you talk a lot about in your book just about how MLS suffered through some very financial hardships early on in their tenure, and in the early 2000s were in danger of just folding it itself. I want to talk to you a little bit about how they've been able to develop to when this pandemic hit, how they were able to deal with it, and just your thoughts on how they were able to do so.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough thing, because one of the situations with MLS that's different compared to some of the bigger European leagues, particularly thinking about the Premier League and maybe to a lesser degree La Liga and Bundesliga, is just the television dollars that are attached to it, right? So, and MLS is much more, and especially the clubs are much more sort of dependent on revenue and the kind of game day experience for generating money, compared to the European leagues. That's not as much of the pie for them. European leagues, it's much more about getting on TV and getting that global audience. I mean, that's still certainly important to MLS, but that's just not as much of the mix yet. Just the TV audience isn't quite cultivated to that point yet. So yeah, and they, even Garber has gone on record saying that they lost a lot of money last year. They, had some players take reductions in salary, staff members take reductions in salary. They had some layoffs. It was a really difficult year. But Garber was in Austin last week to talk about some of that. And he said, the league is in good shape, that it was rough, but definitely we want to get people back to the stadiums, and getting vaccinated is the real answer on that. So yeah, I mean, and I do think it's admirable that MLS, first of all, was able to hang through a really, really difficult season. And MLS is Back tournament, I think, was a really good innovation. I think it also maybe helped grow the audience a little bit, because that was one of the first leagues to come back. I mean, NWSL beat them to it by a little bit with their tournament, but and I think that helps too. I mean, I think certainly the women's pro game can help grow the men's pro game, and hopefully vice versa. But yeah, just to have that tournament, and just to have something on TV that was compelling and interesting, and that came off with the players, being able to be in the bubble and being able to continue through that tournament, and not having the kind of derailment that we, for example, like saw in the NFL, right? So that was good. And then just to be able to come back and have the postseason, which, again, part of the reason that I love MLS so much as a league is, in European leagues, you have your tables, and at the end of the season, that's it, right? So, and sometimes it's decided a couple of months before the end of the season, and it's not that much fun to kind of see those last few games. There's not that much at stake necessarily, but the MLS playoffs are just madcap. They're wild. They're wonderful. There's a lot of unpredictability. The NYCFC Orlando game actually has come back with my son from college in Albuquerque, and we're like in the middle of nowhere, like Fort Sumner, New Mexico. And luckily, I'm still getting the stream. He's driving, so and I'm just watching the penalty kicks and the goalie getting kicked out and Rodrigo Schlegel having to fill in, and it was so funny and so compelling. And at the same time, it was, it's all the drama and the energy and excitement that you love about soccer, but just this kind of weird American spin on it that to me was, it was outstanding. It was really fun to watch. And definitely the storylines of the playoffs were impressive. And yeah, it was great.
So let's talk about a team that maybe has the chance to this season join that kind of crazy playoff race, and that would be Austin FC in their inaugural season. You've been, again, writing a bunch of stories in lead up to their first match this weekend. You'll be covering the stadium progress and, of course, the progress with the team. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement, right? But when you wade past all that, when you talk to people, when you actually analyze the club itself, what are the general expectations for Austin FC this season?
I mean, I know that their goal is to make the playoffs, and that's something that they've talked about a lot. I think that that's something that is a reasonable expectation for the first year. I think it's going to depend on a couple different things. So one thing that I've been hearing a lot in the preseason from the players is about how cerebral the process is, how much of a mental aspect there is to Josh Wolf and what he's bringing as the head coach. I mean, it seems like it's going to be really similar to what Berhalter does with the national team. You're going to expect a front three. He calls them number 10s, but I think they're kind of more free eights. I mean, 10 to me has a very, very specific soccer connotation. They're two central midfielders that will be doing a lot of box to box work. Then you're going to have Alex Ring as the 6, and then a back 4 behind them. So I think being able to kind of learn the system and figure out the kind of things that they're trying to do with the ball, without the ball, is going to be kind of crucial to how they do. And they've got a really, really tough early go of it. So their first 7 games are on the road as the stadium comes online. Their first 3 games are LAFC, obviously one of the best teams in the league. Colorado, solid team. I'm considering them a playoff bubble team. I expect them to be in contention with Austin for one of the final playoff spots in the West. And then you've got Minnesota United, which I actually think will win MLS Cup this year. And I think Reynoso is going to be the MVP. So that's really tough. So I think early going, if they can get over that kind of learning curve, I think they're going to be coming on towards the second half of the season. So, again, for all the Austin FC fans that might be out there, if they start out of the gate a little bit slow, don't despair. I really think they're going to come on, kind of Sounder style second half of the season and do some good things there.
Well, we recently just saw that with Nashville and Miami, right? In terms of, obviously they had to deal with a lot more last season,
right?
But they came on late and were able to make the playoffs. And I asked about that because Austin is coming in as the lone expansion franchise this season. We've seen years past.
Right.
Last year with Miami and Nashville, you had Atlanta and Minnesota one year, you had New York and Orlando another year, and we've seen kind of a mixed results with teams who come in as a lone expansion franchise. I wanted to ask if there's any added pressure that comes with them being the lone expansion franchise this year, as well as the fact that they will be opening up one of the brand new stadiums this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bar is set fairly high for Austin expectation-wise in, maybe not in terms of play, but certainly in terms of making a splash, of being one of these kind of flagship franchises in MLS. I mean, just because of the people who are attached to the team and just kind of how the team came about and the new stadium coming and just, honestly, the kind of cachet that Austin brings, I think culturally, and certainly, you look at something like South by Southwest, and you look at like Willie Nelson, and you look at Matthew McConaughey, who's one of the owners of the teams, obviously, and the big musical tradition. I mean, people know Austin, and also it's going to be a fun road trip, right? So, even if you don't like Austin FC personally as a team, if your team plays them, you're definitely going to want to come here and have barbecue and listen to live music and do all the great things that happen here in Austin. So yeah, so I do think there's kind of that focus being the only expansion team, but I think it also brought some advantages as well, right? So, for example, with Super Draft, or it's not the Super Draft, sorry, the expansion draft, there wasn't another team to kind of ping pong against, right? So, basically just Austin got to set their 5 picks, say, okay, this is who we want from the other teams, and this is who we're going to go after. And so, they were able to do that. So I mean, I do think obviously focus is there, but at the same time, I think that's something that the club really kind of relishes in the way, right? I mean, again, they're it's coming to Austin is about understanding that Austin belongs in MLS, and I think they want to make that felt from year one.
So speaking of future road trips, obviously with new expansion clubs, everyone wants to come in. They want to be like Seattle. They want to be like Atlanta. They want to win MLS Cup as quickly as possible. But we've seen over the years there are varying degrees of success for expansion clubs. It may take 1 or 2 seasons, but eventually, like we've just recently seen with Minnesota, you get to that upper echelon of teams in MLS. And I wanted to speak out with you because I want to get the expansion perspective for teams like Charlotte, who will come in 2022, and of course, on my side specifically, St. Louis, who will come in 2023. Austin will be sort of a benchmark for those clubs to look out for and to see what works in their first season. How do they transition into MLS as quickly and seamlessly as possible? And I wanted to ask for outside fans or fans for other expansion clubs who will be coming up in the next few seasons, what should they be paying attention to and what Austin does, either on the field with the stadium or just in general with the club itself? What kind of things do you think they should be looking out for in terms of their own clubs coming in the future?
Well, I think definitely with the stadium, like you're saying, thinking about how responsive and how attentive does the front office seem to be to the fan experience, right? So just from that kind of how am I going to relate to this club on a human being in the stadium, hopefully 17 home matches a year kind of deal. But in terms of the way that the rosters are designed, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do that. And there's kind of a lot of paths to potential success in MLS. And, I think one of the big things with Austin, and one of the things that really put Austin on the map, was taking someone like Claudio Reyna, who was a very seasoned, experienced GM who had, is a sporting director now for Austin FC. I mean, he had built a team from the ground up in NYCFC, and he's someone with obviously a huge soccer pedigree, obviously a very, very impressive career for club and country. So that was a signing that said, hey, this team is serious. And then just in terms of the players that they put together, I think it's been a good mix. I mean, you've got, and again, it's gonna play out through the season, right? How good is Thomas Pochettino and Cecilio Dominguez, right? So you're going to basically kind of go as far as your designated players will take you to a certain degree when you are in MLS, but at the same time, you also need those kind of glue guys, right? So, people like, Alex Ring, people like Matt Beasler. Well, I wouldn't even call Ring a glue guy. I mean, I think he's a legitimate, MLS star, right? So, but people who like Hector Jimenez is kind of like a perfect example of that, right? So not only is he a versatile player who's experienced, who can go a lot of different directions, but also one of the reasons that he's been there and one of the roles that he's played is to kind of bridge between the English-speaking players and coaching staff members and then the Spanish-speaking players, right? So he's been able to, by virtue of being bilingual as well as by virtue of being experienced and being around a lot of different players, is able to relate and is able to kind of help keep that squad cohesive. And that's going to be really, really important, again, especially when you're doing your first 7 games on the road, right? When your schedule is back-ended where most of the home games are going to be in the second half of the season. You really need to build that kind of resilience and that kind of club culture and be able to weather the early losses that might come. So I think those kind of things are important too, right? So you can have kind of big flashy signings, but if the chemistry is all wrong, then you have to reevaluate that. Like look at Inter Miami last year, right? So you've got Gonzalo Higuain, you've got Blaise Matuidi, you've got Pellegrini, you've got all these players that have these kind of big marquee names, but even though they got into the playoffs, it was because almost everybody got led into the playoffs last year, and they had to kind of hit the reset button on it for this season, even though they did reach that kind of first year playoff goal that certainly expansion teams have. It didn't, you definitely saw them in the playoffs kind of exposed, and you kind of saw what Nashville did to them. I mean, Nashville was, an example of a good solid build, right? So there weren't kind of big flashy stars, but Walker Zimmerman is one of the best defenders in MLS, and you took him off of LAFC and you put him onto Nashville, and you kind of saw how the scales tipped a little bit, with those teams.
Exactly. Phil, I want to transition to specifically more on what you do and some of your work before I let you go. In addition to all the writing that you do, you also teach. You're a professor at University of Texas at San Antonio, and teach a lot about writing. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, you've obviously seen a lot in your industry as a writer, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about, in such a fast-changing industry in terms of technology, in terms of style, and things that come up, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what practices or lessons do you like to focus in your teaching when you're teaching to students who want to become writers and journalists?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, when I teach writing, I'm teaching in an academic setting, but I also want to have kind of real world writing experience. So a lot of it boils down to thinking about the rhetorical triangle, thinking about, your role as an author, the audience you're trying to reach, the purpose. So taking very much that kind of approach. And again, just kind of thinking about the various mediums that you might be writing in, right? So I talk about one of the early things I do is I have them write a letter to an imagined person or a real person in their life, just because there's a audience relationship that's built into that kind of writing already. So just doing that. And then, certainly thinking about writing online, thinking about, what you do in a tweet versus what you do in a text versus what you do in a blog post, right? So there's a lot of different things that you're trying to accomplish, a lot of different audience expectations within those windows. So that's been, obviously that's been something that's been challenging as well. You mentioned the pandemic earlier. A lot of my students would rather be in the classroom. I would too. I mean, I can say that I don't necessarily miss the 2.5-hour commute back home, which is what it turns to when you put San Antonio traffic and Austin traffic together. But yeah, I mean, I know that it's been tough. I mean, my oldest son is a college freshman, and it's been a really, really unusual experience for him. So he's been on a dorm, then he's been back home, and the classroom experience is almost exactly the same. The food that you can get and the experiences you can have are a little bit different when you're on a college campus versus at home, but when you're on a college campus in a pandemic, it's limiting, unfortunately. So hopefully we get back to normal, and hopefully, again, not just for the sake of students and my students, but also obviously for the sake of soccer fans, because full rocking stadiums are much more preferable to, the weirdness of the empty stadiums that we've had over the past year. So although, understandable, necessary, got to do the right thing, but, get your vaccine, y'all.
Most definitely. Well, Phil, it's been an honor to have you on the show. Real quickly before you go, where can people go to read or to listen to more of your work here as we get into the MLS season?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am recently have crossed over. I did some work for Austin FC to help prepare them for their debut season. But now I'm writing at a site called the Striker Texas, and that's thestrikertexas.com. And that's just a deep dive onto all three of the MLS teams. But a lot of the work that I'm going to be doing is kind of general, more league-wide stuff. So even if you're not needing to get the latest in-depth information on Texas MLS teams and other Texas teams, which you should anyway, because Texas is a very rich and diverse and big state. I am bringing a lot of kind of league-wide perspective into what's going on as well, and even delving into some national team things from time to time. So so that's where. And then my Twitter account is Phil West, and I generally kind of more interact with other people than pump up my own stuff, but occasionally I will pump up my own stuff. And we just had this crazy kind of situation happen yesterday. We had someone who was enamored with the Verdi keeper's kit that he saw one of the players wearing in the preseason. And he's been doing this kind of daily Twitter campaign to try to convince the club to release it. And we ended up through Twitter connecting him with that player, and they had a back and forth, and the guy ended up just basically donating a bunch of money to the guy's favorite charity, and they're having conversations now, which is really cool, right? So that when Twitter works, it's about that. It's about connecting people in real time, and when it's bad, it's horrid, but when it's good, it's very, very good.
Exactly. I know that a lot of people were going to be really excited and interested to see how Austin FC do. Obviously, it's kind of a baptism by fire this weekend versus LAFC. But again, very excited to have a new team at MLS. And of course, if you want to check out more of Phil's work, United States of Soccer. It's a fantastic book on the history of MLS. You learn a lot about the origins of the league, why we are at this point, and how things have developed along the way. So again, Phil, thank you so much for joining me. And again, very excited to see what you come up here with your work here throughout the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't been in St. Louis since I think 2004, but yeah, definitely we'll need to come through when your team's up and running.
My thanks to Phil for joining me on the show. That'll do it for this week's episode of the Gateway to Soccer Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Enjoy the opening weekend of MLS and all the other soccer going on. And I can't wait to be right back here next week with a brand new episode. Thanks again, and have a great weekend.